Hello and welcome to Dinis Guarda YouTube podcast series powered by citiesabc.com and openbusinesscouncil.org. We are here once again to profile some of the leading thought leaders and personalities in the world that are pushing the boundaries and especially making us think about the present, the past, and the future, and especially how we can actually use these ideas, this innovation to make our lives better, but as well to understand better our present and how we can actually better write the narratives of the future. I think we are in a very extreme, fascinating times for good and for bad, and these times required a lot of homework, a lot of writing, a lot of reading, and that's why we have today here a writer and a researcher that is quite an impressive one in terms of CV, but as well in terms of achievements, but as well in terms of the main ideas and moonshots that they've been taking forward. So I welcome to our series Dr. Mark van Rijmenam. And I think Mark is quite well known within the technology world, is an international keynote speaker and author that is normally thinking and writing about and researching about the future of work and the business organizations of tomorrow. And he's been looking at especially in the future of tech strategies and how emerging technologies can change organizations, society, and increasingly all the different emergent technologies of our times, such as the metaverse, which is the focus of his last book, which we're going to be talking today. So the book is Step into the Metaverse, and we're going to be highlighting this. We're going to put links for the book. It's a great book. I suggest everyone to read. And actually, it's one of the first books written about the metaverse probably ever, because we have, I think if you look at the books, probably 10, maximum 20 books. I think the subtitle is How the Immersive Internet Will Unlock $1 trillion Social Economy. And I think this speaks for itself. It actually has a forward by a former partner of mine, Jamie Burke, that I think is interesting to read as well. So I think in terms of background of Mark, and I think most of you can actually have a look, but he's been advising very big organizations worldwide and international big tech corporations. I think some of the work that is actually working is actually leading is working across countries, like he's been speaking in over 20 countries, and collective being speaking in events with over 100,000 managers, directors, and special C-level personalities. And he's as well a global speaker, part of the member of the Global Speakers Federation, and as well he has a social media presence that speaks for itself, but as well as the founder of Data Flock, the one-stop source for big data, offering information, insights, and knowledge. And part of his work has been mostly on the research and looking at insights and how to take it forward, which I think it's a key element for all of us that are in technology. And that's what we're going to be talking about this. But I would say, just as a couple of other notes, he holds a PhD in management from the University of Technology of Sydney, and research was on how organizations should deal with big data analytics, blockchain, and AI. So I'll stop here. You can see his bio attached to this email, and as well on the links you're going to be adding. But I'm excited to be here, and welcome to our series, Mark.
Well, thanks for having me, Dinis, and thanks for the awesome introduction. It's great to be here.
My pleasure. So, Mark, I want to start by the basis. So, as a personality of business and as a personality of thinking in the future, where were the things, especially that made you who you are now, and especially from your early childhood to your education? So I think I always like to go through this inception and what makes the true profile of each of us. And we have a lot of fantastic stories in the process.
Well, it's a good way to start, and I think I haven't really have the standard career. I've just been following the passions that I like, and I actually started with a bachelor in hospitality management. So I used to work in the hotel industry. I used to work in the Caribbean. I used to work in Dubai in the Middle East. I was actually part of the opening team of the first indoor ski resort in the Middle East, which was a fantastic experience. And that's about 16, 17 years ago. After that, I went into I did another education, a Master of Science in Marketing Management at a university in the Netherlands, after which I ended up in the financial services industry at the bank ING, the headquarters in the Netherlands. I quickly found out that I that the corporate business life wasn't really for me, and that was sort of a pivotal moment. About over 10 or 11 years ago, I went on a big adventure with a friend of mine, and we cycled around Australia, as you do as a Dutchie, in 100 days, and that was an absolutely amazing and a pivotal moment for myself in my life, because once you've done that, once you've gone on such an adventure of cycling over 14,000 kilometers in 100 days, you don't really want to go back to a corporate job. You don't want to work for a boss anymore. So when we came back, I sort of decided to start my own company. And for the first half a year or so, I tried a variety of things. Failed miserably in all of them, and then I had to get back. I had to get back into corporate life. So I had to get a job. I didn't like my job. After half a year, quit my job and gave myself a second chance to start to become an entrepreneur. And that's basically when my entrepreneurial life, as what I do today, started. I launched Dataflock, which was then called Big Data Startups. I came up with the idea on Sunday, and my website was live on Monday. I actually really didn't have at that moment a good understanding of what big data was and how it was going to change the world. But I thought, this is going to be a hot topic, and I'm going to teach myself, I'm going to learn, and I'm going to share that information online. And lo and behold, a month and a half later, I was invited as a keynote speaker at a conference as the expert on big data. And I thought, if you can be an expert within a month and a half, something crazy is going on. I went down the rabbit hole because I thought, well, this is something that I need to explore. 4 months later, I thought, let's have a look at how much content I've written. I figured that I had half a book created, sent out a few book proposals to a few publishers, and a couple of weeks later I had my first signed book contract with an American publisher. So it's sort of really a bit of a roller coaster as it started in the beginning. And from there on, I really went down the rabbit hole of technology, and I started to find that this is my passion, and that I really enjoy thinking about emerging technologies and exploring how these technologies are changing society. So after doing Dataflock for a couple of years, I got the opportunity to do a PhD here in Australia. I currently live in Australia at the University of Technology in Sydney, as you mentioned. I always wanted to do a PhD, so I thought, let's grab this opportunity. And I did my research initially on big data and design thinking. Having written my first book on big data, I thought it would be good to do that. After a couple of months, I came across blockchain, and I thought this is such a fundamental technology that is going to change society. I want to incorporate that into my PhD. So I basically restarted my PhD, incorporated blockchain in my thesis, as well as AI. During my PhD, I wrote my second book, which is called Blockchain, and it's all about how blockchain can be used for social good. I wrote that with a colleague from the university, Dr. Philippa Ryan, and we created. The book was really meant to help people understand how we can use blockchain in ways that are beneficial to society. And throughout the past 5 or 7 years, that thread has become more common in my career, that I want to focus on how can we now understand technology, and how can we use technology as a force for good, as a force for value creation instead of a force for value extraction. I finished my PhD after within 3 years. Decided to turn my dissertation into a management book, because nobody reads dissertations because they are generally quite boring. So I turned my dissertation into my third book, called The Organization of Tomorrow. Moved back to the Netherlands, tried a different startup on misinformation, where we wanted to use AI to fight misinformation. Unfortunately, that failed. So I can now also proudly say that I have a failed startup under my belt, which I think is always good. From there on, I basically did my work as a keynote speaker, shared my knowledge, all my insights with organizations around the world. When I was on a good track record, at least I thought so, the pandemic hit, and both my speaking business and my advertising business went just down the drain, as happened for a lot of people. So I had to reinvent myself, which I did, because I thought, why don't I practice what I preach? So I preach digitalization, digital transformation. So I decided to digitally transform myself, So I came up with the brand, The Digital Speaker, and I digitalized myself. So I made myself available as an avatar, made myself available as a hologram, and started to deliver keynotes like that, create a podcast with my avatar, where my avatar covers the digital world from inside the digital world. And I've been exploring that ever since. And I think it's a fascinating topic to do so. And about last year, October 2021, Wiley approached me if I wanted to write a book about the metaverse. And that's sort of where everything converged, because the metaverse is sort of a convergence of various technologies. I grabbed that opportunity to write a book about this topic. And that's where we are now at the moment.
Amazing. And it's wonderful, the innuendos of history. And I think everyone has to go through all these changes to come where we are right now. So I have one question for you, because one of the things that in all your work, and we go to the books before we go to the last one, is that you are very focused on the future of work, how to digital transformation. So let's go to your childhood or even teenage years. So when was the first time that you start looking at the future? Because I think it's one thing that most of people around us, and I'm a futurist in a lot of ways as well, are focused on the present or the past. And very few people have a conscious of looking at facts that can drive better future, or even looking, sometimes if you just drown on the news, you get completely lost and you become really very negative, which is a big problem for our society, or you get into all the stereotypes that unfortunately we see in most of the countries. So when was the first time, let's say one moment in your history, personal history, that made you conscious about the future and look at that? Because I think it's particularly interesting when you look into the metaverse, because it's present, but it's future increasingly.
Very good question. Look, when I was a kid, I wanted to become a chef, because I liked cooking, and I first pursued that career as I mentioned. I went into hospitality, and then I wasn't really thinking about the future at all. I was just living the present, and actually, I think only when I really took my life into my own hands, when I went on to an adventure with my friend by cycling around Australia, I think that sort of really changed me. And then I thought, I want to take, as I said, my life into my own hands and be in full control over my life. And that's how I sort of rolled in, as I mentioned, into the world of technology. Before that, I wasn't really working in that space. I worked at ING, at the Dutch bank, the headquarters. I was part of the, among others, of the marketing department. And that was very much more into the present. But when I started to work on my own company, and when I started to take a deep dive into technology, I sort of noticed that I have an interest in the future. I have an interest in digital technologies, and I think I have the talent or the capabilities. I'm not sure how you want to say that, of thinking exponentially and thinking of what does it mean that we have an exponential technology, and how is it going to change organizations, not 2 years from now, but 5 years or 10 years from now, because generally people are linear thinkers, because it's difficult to think in an exponential way. And I think that sort of happened only about a decade ago, when I started with my own company. And in my childhood, I wanted to become a setter.
So let me ask you one thing here. We'll take note on this. So in terms of this story, so it's interesting because in your case, it seems like a lot of your work was answering to specific problems, and you adapt. And actually, this opens a lot of different things. So I want to touch, and actually ironic, when you look at technology, a lot of things in technology are precisely answering to problems. It's like blockchain came out as a way of looking how we can look at encryption technologies and apply it to a specific case study for virtual money. And in the case of metaverse, it's a continuation of creating digital twins and all these different things. But I'm interested to go. So let's look at your books, and because you have fantastic books. So one of the first ones was Thinker Bigger, 2014. Then you went to Blockchain, 2018. And then the Organization of Tomorrow, the Platform Revolution. And then the last one, Step Into the Metaverse. So I would like, this is quite interesting because this is really, I would say, the trajectory of technology, because you start really into the first one. Let's look at the Think Bigger, because I think it's particularly interesting. And the way you do it is that you always look at the big picture, but then you go to a lot of details. So I would like to touch the think bigger first, because I think we need that more than ever. And then I want to go to blockchain afterwards.
Sounds good. So I think with think bigger, the objective of the book was helping people understand how is data going to change the world. And mind you, this is 8 years ago, 9 years ago that I wrote it, 8 years ago that it was published. So the world really looked differently back then. It's so much has happened in the past 8 or 9 years. But I noticed already that back then that some companies are really understanding how they can leverage data in order to create a better organization for themselves, for their employees, and most often also for their customers. And I think that is really, I thought it was really interesting to see and to learn from and to share that knowledge with others, how you can leverage this. My title Think Bigger came from the idea of, with data, we have so much data at hand back then already. And by now it's like 10 or 20 times more than we had 8 years ago. And I guess in the next 10 years, it will be 100 times more than we have today. So we really have to think bigger. If we want to understand what this means and what all this data means for us and how we can use this data, how we can leverage this data, we have to have this different perspective into our organization. I always refer to the term Gestalt shift, which I think is a fantastic term, which really explains that you have to take this different perspective. And it's maybe it's linked to this image where you can either see the duck or you see the rabbit, but you can't see them both at once. And the switch, that's called the Gestalt shift. That's the switch where you see either the duck or the rabbit. And that means you have taking a different perspective onto something that you're looking at. And data allows you to do that with your organization. It allows you to have this different perspective and think of, okay, how can I use how can I create an organization that is there for our employees, that's there for our customers, and then that's beneficial to everyone. And I think that's so important. And that's what the story that I try to write in Think Bigger is one of how can you use data in ways that are beneficial, not only for your organization, but also for your employees and for your customers. Because that's often, I think, forgotten that people data gives you an opportunity to deliver a one-of-a-kind of product for your customers. And I always say that if you take care of your customers will take care of your shareholders. So your main focus should be on your customers.
Yeah, it's a key element, and it's really data in the last 9 years, like you said, matured to a completely different ballgame. So let's look at then from data to blockchain. So interesting as well. Their books kind of map the last 10 years mostly of technology. So how do you see blockchain, especially as we stated now? Because it's particularly interesting because there's multiple different areas. There's corporate blockchain. There's the more radical kind of DeFi, decentralized, and a lot of different areas. Actually, part of your thesis in your book is about if you get a decentralized web or decentralized technology. And then, of course, there's another area that is a lot of practical solutions of supply chain that it's already going in mainstream. So how do you see these parts, and as well in the context of your last book on this area?
Yeah, so for me, when I first came across blockchain in 2016, it took a bit of time before I really grasped, the concept. Because back then, I think the DAO had just happened, and figuring out how that actually worked took a bit of time. But once I grasped it, I thought, well, this is going to fundamentally change our society, because all of a sudden, blockchain allows us to get rid of the intermediaries, get rid of the middleman that we need in order to ensure trust between two transactions. And that's basically what blockchain does. Blockchain allows us to have trust, to have provenance of a product or provenance of data, and that brings the transparency that is necessary if we want to do trades with people or organizations whom we don't necessarily know. And I think from a supply chain perspective, blockchain is going to be the golden standard. Blockchain will make a supply chain so much more effective and efficient, getting rid of all the paper stack that we use now when we ship our products around the world. And it's actually quite a miracle that we have a global supply chain which is so complex. And actually, as we noticed with the pandemic, it is so complex and it can easily fall apart. And it takes a long time to restart that. So we'll get back to the same status of the global supply chain as we had before the pandemic, but it takes time. And my hope is that blockchain will play an important role there in making this all more effective and efficient. So from a intra-organization collaboration, blockchain is, as I said, the golden standard. Now, from a perspective of finance, for example, decentralized finance, blockchain allows us to share, how do you say that? To send money from one end of the world to the other. And just actually today, I was reading a post on LinkedIn where, if you want to send money from one end to the world to the other world, the money can sort of lost for weeks, and it can bounce, and it can cost you a lot of money if it bounces, and you get no explanations from the banks whatsoever. While with crypto, which is an application on blockchain, I can just send that money around the world in seconds for very little cost. And I think that really democratizes the access to money. And because, mind you, there are still billions of people, I think almost 1.2 billion people, who don't have a bank account. Who cannot have who do not have the luxury that we have of a bank account, of money in our account that we can draw on, that we can send around the world. There are billions of people who don't have that, and blockchain and crypto will enable that. So then, from a DeFi perspective, I think that's sort of the next level where we try to create a decentralized financial services, basically a copy of all the centralized services that we have, but then without the intermediary, without the middleman. So that means mortgages, that means loans, that means maybe peer-to-peer lending, it means money, whatever you can think of. And I think that will really help also those unbanked to have access to the global economy. Now, to answer your point in terms of how this relates to the metaverse, I think with the metaverse, the fact that we have now blockchain technology, that the fact that we have this decentralized infrastructure, it allows us to own our own digital assets. This is commonly referred to as non-fungible tokens, or NFTs, and that is truly revolutionary. I'm not referring to $69 million JPEGs or crazy monkeys that are worth a lot, that give you a lot of perks. No, I'm referring to the fact that you can prove the ownership of a particular digital asset. And that's mind-blowing. And because if you compare that to the physical world, when you're able to prove that you own a physical asset, for example, a house, that house moved from being a place for shelter to something that you can monetize, and you can get a loan against it, again, a mortgage against it, that you can then use to build a business. And the same applies with digital assets. When you can prove ownership, it moves from being a JPEG or a digital asset to something that you can monetize. And I think that is an absolutely crucial component for the metaverse, where we have these digital assets that we can monetize. I think that in the coming decade, that will open up what's called the imagination age. And the imagination age is a hypothetical age, which was coined, I think, in the 1990s. But it's sort of the idea that AI takes over, and all is left for humans is being creative, and hence the imagination age. And I sort of adapted that a little bit, that the imagination age will allow us to be creative, and with that creativity we can turn those into digital assets, and we can monetize that, and that will democratize again the access to the global economy for billions of people. And I think that's the power of blockchain. And without blockchain, none of this would have been possible.
No, I subscribe completely. And it's interesting the way you put it ask you a couple of questions there, and I want to then go to your last book. So we have right now, you touched the major kind of trends and actually major directions of blockchain. One of the biggest challenges we're facing right now is kind of the fight between centralized and decentralized systems. And you mentioned correctly that the biggest challenge we have in terms of when it comes to even financial transactions, first of all, the lack of access to financial inclusion, which is a very basic stuff, but like you said, 1.7 billion people don't have access to that. And the second one is definitely the challenge we have with conventional traditional finance that is working probably increasingly worst. But at the same time, we have a paradox, is that there's more and more money on crypto and trading on DeFi and so forth. We're talking about, well, now there's a bit of a crash, but still we're talking about over close to $2 trillion being traded in crypto. And ironic, I can pay and send money to you in crypto for the space of a couple of minutes, sometimes seconds. Whereas if effectively I send a transfer from my bank to Australia, it will take probably 2 days. And effectively the money can be lost. Actually, I've been having a lot of problems with that myself. So, and even in between first world countries, I mean, the UK, you are in Australia. So if I send, I still have a problem between the banks of premium first world. So this is creating a bit of a schizophrenic approach towards kind of creating a parallel finance and a parallel economy, because of course, that means if you are quite crypto savvy, you can actually beat transaction hundreds of millions of dollars without any government knowing. And that is happening right now. If you look at the exchanges, some of the exchanges are trading hundreds of billions of dollars, and they have very small compliance, or even if they have great compliance, not their fault, the governments cannot track things. So how do you see that part particularly? It's more on the financial side, but this includes a lot of questions in terms of work, because let's say, for instance, I'm paying some parts of even teams that is easy to pay them in USDT than actually to pay them in US dollars. So it's a big challenge right now. How do you deal with this? And of course, this is going to be increasing more difficult and more challenging with NFTs, with digital worlds like metaverse worlds and so forth. So I want to touch that before we merge to the book.
You cover a lot of very, very important topics, Dinis, and I think that's one of the reasons that I'm a new venture that I'm currently working on, which is called the Digital Futures Institute, which is a sort of a research institute focused on ensuring a fair digital future for everyone. Because all the problems that you just mentioned don't point into that direction. Because you're absolutely right, DeFi at the moment is very, very difficult. DeFi has a very much UI and UX problem, I think, and one of the reasons why it's not very much used at the moment, I think early this year, about 5 million people or so were using it, is because of this. And you need to be quite tech savvy if you want to understand how to open a wallet, how to buy crypto, how to get verified on these exchanges. How to protect your wallet so that your wallet doesn't get hacked, as it happened on Solana a couple of days ago. So you have to be very, very tech savvy. That is a problem. And if the objective of blockchain is, and I think should be, to open up the global economy for also all those unbanked, but also those non-digital native people, which are still into the billions of people, because also don't forget there's still a couple billion people who don't have access to the internet at the moment. We need to create a fair digital future, and this goes beyond not only DeFi. It is also related to AI. It's also related to data collection, data extraction. And it covers a lot more. But I think the problems that you mentioned are real, and we need to have, from a DeFi perspective alone, we need to really up our game in terms of UX and UI, and it should be as easy as using the DeFi as it is as you use your credit card online today. When we first had credit cards online about 20 years ago, everyone was very wary on using your credit card online because it might have gone wrong and it was difficult to use. And I remember that my parents, they very much didn't like using that at that point of time. And that's sort of where DeFi is at the moment as well. And we need to make that shift. We need to make that next step, next iteration to make it accessible for everyone.
It's the biggest challenge. And I think, like you said, at the beginning of the internet, we had the same challenge precisely. So these innovative technologies, sometimes they don't come with the practicalities. And even, for instance, for people listening to us, I always like to repeat, for instance, if you look at even Amazon, when they crash massive, their stock, they would be a crash as big as crypto right now. So sometimes people forget these things because the stock was kind of like this. Well, I want to go back to the book. So I think repeating the book, Step Into the Metaverse, how the immersive internet will unlock $1 trillion social economy. I think the book highlights a lot of these things. So I want to start with the first question, and I will start reading a quote of yours from the foreword of the book. I think it's from the preface, sorry. So you share, this is your words, my vision for the metaverse, what it can become and how it will change our identity, as well as how we play, socialize, shop, and work. And if we manage to develop an open metaverse, the trillions of dollars generated will be shared with all creators and creatives. But beware, there are dangers lurking on the road ahead that we need to think about to avoid making the same mistakes as we did when we're building Web 2.0 or the social internet. So I would like to start with a bit of a developing of this for people, of course, that didn't read the book. This is what the book is about. But I would like to touch these areas because there's a lot of things here. But as well, I like the way you put it in the 3 layers. Mostly the first layer, of course, the possibilities and how this is shifting our economies. The second part is, of course, how we take it in terms of an open metaverse, which is a tricky one because you don't have an open internet. And the third thing, of course, is about how to bring it to nurture creators and creatives, and of course the dangers that come out of this. So if you could elaborate a bit. I always ask big questions, so feel free to cut it in pieces and take it the way you want. It's quite open as well.
Yeah, well, sure. Well, it's yeah. I think that the metaverse is a fascinating future, and mind you, the metaverse doesn't exist yet. It's not there yet. Although you could argue that what we are doing at the moment, this interview is sort of part of the metaverse because I am physically in Australia, you're physically in Europe, and we are connected digitally with each other and having this conversation. And to me, the metaverse is this convergence of the physical and the digital, where the physical meets into the digital world and the digital meets into the physical world. That's far beyond virtual reality. That's far beyond gaming, which you sometimes hear people say. It also includes augmented reality, but it also includes just the internet as we have it today, etc. And for me, the metaverse is therefore very much the next iteration of the internet. And that's something different than Web3. And that's also, I think, an important distinction that we need to make, that the metaverse does not equal Web3. The Web3 is the infrastructure on which we build the internet, and Web3 means it's a decentralized infrastructure. The current internet is built on Web2 technology, which is centralized technologies. Centralized infrastructure. Now, and that's where my quest or my drive or my approach for an open metaverse comes from. Because as you mentioned, the current internet is anything but open. It's controlled by a few very, very big companies who control all our data, who control all our digital lives, and are almost all powerful when it comes to our digital lives. Now, with the metaverse, we sort of have this unique opportunity, this one shot, this one chance to rebuild that, to create a metaverse, to create an internet which is there for us, for you and me, for us as consumers, and not is there for the big tech controlling us. And so my book is really meant as a blueprint of how can we create this open metaverse. What do we need to do to achieve that? And we have to be very careful when we build the metaverse, because don't forget, when the internet first arrived, it was very much an open internet. When we talk about Web 1, the early days of the internet, it was very difficult to build a website. So you had to host your own data, you had to host your own website, you had full control over all this, and it was very much in our own control. But because it was so difficult, we had centralized companies standing up and being created who made it very, very easy for us. And that caused this explosion of economic growth and innovation. But at the same time, people sort of got used to these ease of services, which are all free of charge. But we all know that if something is free, it means that you are the product. And we sort of, we're sort of sleepwalking into a world where it's either state surveillance or it's corporate surveillance, but it's not that we are in control of our own digital lives. And so with an open metaverse, I think we should try to reverse that. We should try to, we have the technologies now available, such as blockchain technology, to take back this control from the big tech, from even states, and have full control over how we want to build our own lives, so that we have control over our digital identity, we have control over our digital assets, and we have control over our own data. And I think that's really important, because if we do that, then we are able to create this trillions of dollars of economic growth, which do not end up in the hands of a few big tech companies, but they can end up in the hands of everyone in society. And that will really have a big impact, I think, on the global economic growth. So for me, and I always mention that an open metaverse is absolutely no guarantee. It's very well possible that we will build the metaverse on Web 2 technology. We don't need Web 3 technology to build the metaverse. We need Web 3 technology to build an open metaverse. And I think that is very, very important to be aware of, because if we don't pay attention while building the metaverse, we might end up in a worse situation than we are today, where, as we can see from the well-known examples, Ready Player One or Snow Crash, the metaverse is owned by a tiny elite who have full control over our own lives. And that's something that I'm very passionate about, that we should avoid at all times. We should create a metaverse that's for you and me.
So let me ask you a practical question. So you touch before that we still have a challenge, for instance, with even just opening an NFT wallet. And of course, right now, when you talk about metaverse, and I like that you separate metaverse from Web 3.0. So let's look at definitions. And I think that let's start first with definitions. And my question is, how can we make that? Because the challenge is that in the end of the day, if you have initiative, you want to own your initiative, you want to own your IP. And normally a group is created by people that have strong initiative, and they normally own IP. So that's the principles of capitalism. But the challenge is that if you own that IP, and I think that's the challenge, probably the Web 3. Or the Web 2.0, is that the IP is actually not owned by the creators, but by organizations that gather this IP, take the data, and resell it. So let's go to definitions first. How do you define Web 3.0 more in detail for people listening to us, and the metaverse? Because it's really, I think, of course, the definitions are open. Of course, it's not closed, but I think it's important to look at this.
I completely agree with you. And for my book, I interviewed 100 people, in-depth interviews. I had another 150 surveys, and I got 250 different definitions of what the metaverse is. So it sort of explains already how difficult this and how abstract this concept is. So for me, Web3 refers to the infrastructure, the hardware on which we build the internet. Web3 technologies refer to distributed ledger technologies, blockchain technologies that enable that. A blockchain, again, is just a database, but instead of read, write, and edit, it's read and write, which gives you the verification, the transfer, the possibility to verify your data and to have full control over that, of how it's being used, and to not make sure that it's not being changed and tampered with. And that is Web3 technologies. So it's how we store our data, how we distribute our data, and how we access our data. The metaverse is what we build, what we can build on top of that. It's basically the applications, the internet. So the internet is built, it's the immersive internet that we allow, that we use to access all this data. And we can access it through virtual reality, we can access it through augmented reality, we can access it through a desktop, a tablet, or a mobile phone, a watch, or whatever future devices will have coming up. And so then when we go to the metaverse, as I mentioned earlier, for me, it's the convergence of the physical and the digital realities, where the physical meets into the digital world, which basically means we bring, for example, digital twins into a virtual reality or into a desktop, and we can interact with them through a digital realm. Or it is even also just a virtual reality game where we can explore what's happening and have some fun. And at the same time, when we talk about augmented reality, it's where we bring the digital into the physical world. And this can be, again, for entertainment. We can have, I don't know, a flying dragon above Times Square, which is nice to have a look at. Or it can be a way to interact with the smart city, where we can see the overlay of what's happening within the city. And that's the augmented reality. And I personally think that augmented reality is much bigger, much more important than virtual reality, because we can build near infinite layers, or lenses, I call them in the book, on top of the physical reality for us to interact with. So I wouldn't be surprised that if this technology advances far enough, 10 years from now, we don't need a phone anymore, we don't need a laptop anymore, we don't need a tablet anymore. All we need is some very, very advanced smart glasses or even smart contact lenses for us to interact with the internet. And that's where we're heading. And again, for that interaction, for the immersive internet, we don't need Web3. I think we should want it, but we don't need it. And I think that's very, very important to be aware of, because otherwise people think that it will just happen by itself, and it won't happen by itself. It will require hard work, because as we mentioned, DeFi at the moment is very, very difficult. So if we want the entire world to use it, we need to make it easy as a community. Otherwise, we'll have, again, just centralized tools which are easy to use, and people will flock to that. So that's sort of my distinction here.
I subscribe actually to most of your ideas. Actually, I completely am with you. So your chapter 2 touched a bit of a step ahead. So you talk about creating an open metaverse, open versus closed, the hybrid web, and an open economic system. I think this is probably the biggest challenge of our times, because of course we have, geopolitics, you mentioned that, and we had COVID, now we have a war that is still a bit paradox war, and we have a lot of geopolitical issues right now, but you cannot really stop this. Okay, that's the interesting thing that you just touched, but you have a very specific part on this chapter 2 that I think it's important to, first of all, for people being aware, because I think most of the people are still discovering what is metaverse. So we have, I think probably you and me are a bit ahead of the time, but I think for people listening to us, even the most sophisticated, they have a lot of prejudice. And if you talk the metaverse, like you said, from augmented reality, I think people understand it. If you talk from NFTs, people don't understand it. But I would like to hear your vision from the open metaverse and the open versus closed. And now we can actually make this not another dystopian crazy technology, because this can go very wrong. And I have some questions about that, but we'll take it afterwards.
Absolutely, this can go very wrong indeed, and I dedicated an entire chapter to that of all the things how it can go wrong. As I mentioned before, I think what is important for an open metaverse is that we have this control over our own data, control over our own digital assets, and control over our own identity. And in order to achieve that, we need not only be able to have control of that data, but also to move it around to wherever we want it to go. And that interoperability is currently not possible. If I want to take my Facebook data and move it and download all my photos, all my feed, all my followers, and move it to another platform, that's simply not possible. If I want to send you a WhatsApp message and you don't have WhatsApp but you have Telegram, that's also not possible. Now, the European Union is working on changing that with their new legislation, but it's very, very difficult to achieve that. However, we do know the benefits of having this interoperability, because with email, it is possible. I can send you an email from my Gmail account to, let's say you have Yahoo or Hotmail or whatever, and that works perfectly fine. And it shows the massive benefits that this interoperability brings. So if we want to achieve an open metaverse, we need interoperability. I think that's absolutely crucial, so that we can take our data and our assets from one platform, from one game, from one environment to the other. That's one. So we also need to have decentralization. We need to have this control, and that's where blockchain comes into play. Because without blockchain, we can't control our own data, because it's still, without blockchain, it still resides in a centralized database. And if it's a centralized database, that person or that entity who owns that centralized database can do with it whatever they want. So blockchain is an absolute requirement if we want to do this. Then we also need persistency. So we need to be able for the metaverse to be persistent, which basically, again, is linked to decentralization. Is that if I create, I don't know, a virtual house on a virtual plot of land, I want that to be there tomorrow when I go back. I don't want some centralized entity to think, oh, I don't like this house, and I'm going to delete it. Just like in the physical world, when you come home from work, you would like your house to be still there, and not that someone decided to demolish it because they didn't like, the way it looked. So that's also what we need for the metaverse. We also need spatiality. So we also need to be able to find what we are looking for in the metaverse. Because at the moment, mind you, there is no Google in the metaverse. If you want to find a particular asset on the immersive internet, it's impossible to do. You cannot find, go somewhere and search, find me asset XYZ, and take me there with the click of the button. That just doesn't work. So we need to have the spatiality so we can find what we're looking for across all these metaverse experiences. I think what also is very important with an open metaverse is it's very much community driven. So it's very much, and this is where decentralized autonomous organizations come into play, where you have a community coming together to use decentralized technology to solve a problem or to create some kind of innovation or to create value. And then the final component or final characteristic of an open metaverse is self-sovereignty, self-sovereign identity, and self-sovereign reputation. Those last one is often forgotten. And self-sovereign identity means, again, that you have full control over your own identity, and not someone can delete your account. And an example I use in the book, which to me is still mind-blown, is that a couple of days after Zuckerberg announced Meta, there's this Australian artist who had the handle Metaverse on Instagram. And like 1 or 2 days after Zuckerberg announced Meta, her entire account, 10 years of history, all her artwork was deleted with the click of a button. And she was not able to connect with Instagram to figure out what had happened and to reinstate her account. Only after a couple of weeks, when she reached out, I think, to the New York Times, and the New York Times reached out to Facebook, they said, "Oh, we're so sorry, this happened by accident." Well, we of course all know that it didn't happen by accident. And I think that is crucial to prevent from happening in the metaverse. Because if we are moving all our value, all our digital lives to the metaverse, we don't want someone to just delete it because they don't like your brand or because they want your brand name or whatsoever. And self-sovereignty is therefore very, very important. And it means we have your identity is protected, so it can't be deleted. It's private. It's about you. It's persistent. It cannot be it remains online unless you delete it. It's portable. You can take it from one way to another. And I think those are sort of crucial elements when we talk to self-sovereignty of how you want to create an open metaverse. Now, all these characteristics are very difficult technical and cultural challenges in itself. Because, again, referring to the DeFi problem that we have, all of them require people to change behavior. And when it comes to changing behavior, technology is the easy problem. I think that is sort of the challenge that we have here. How are we going to achieve this? How are we going to build this open metaverse? Knowing that the technology is a hard problem, but it's still the easy problem.
It's a very, very good points, and I think it's really important to look at this. Of course, it's very difficult because governance is difficult. Even in a small startup, having everyone to agree is difficult in the family. So imagine all these things, and of course, doing this with code. You mentioned DAO; it's a quite challenging part. So I want to touch one thing that you touch partly. Well, you touch a lot of different areas, but I think I want to touch one area that is on the bridge of what you discuss here. So especially that's the part of the creativity part of the way you're going to look at metaverse and the creative industries, the influencers or even researchers like us. How we look at this and how we can actually make this work, because of course the challenge right now is that from Twitter or YouTube where we're making this interview and then the distribution across the internet, the challenge is that these platforms are giving us, of course, fantastic technology, and they have, of course, fantastic returns, but of course they have a lot of costs as well. But they depend on, let's say, I would say probably 1% of the internet creates the internet and makes the content that everyone uses in one way or the other. The other probably 10% distributes it, and the 90% just gets it. So if you look at this and how we can actually look at these tools and revolutionize or at least evolve these tools to make it more, I would say, sustainable or at least scalable, because the challenge right now is definitely that unless you are very tech savvy, because you need to be tech savvy, like you said, to create an NFT wallet, to promote as well, you need a huge marketing capacity, which most of people don't have it. And then you have to have the network. People like me and you have a huge network. You interview 100 people to your book. There's a lot of efforts to do that. There's a lot of network even to get 100 people to have their time. Most of the people don't have this. And they just want to come to the metaverse or to these platforms to just get some game, play some time, and probably most of them don't think about it. I would say 99%. So how can we really get this, first of all, the creator economy and the gig economy to be better rewarded in a way that is not dystopian? And secondly, how can I actually make it in platform? And you touched part of that, but I would like more on the creator economy and the gig economy.
Yeah, so I think when we look at from the creator economy, and as I mentioned just before, this imagination age that we can end up in, and for me that is a very good utopian future to look forward to, where we have where creativity, whatever that means, is being rewarded, and you as the creator are being rewarded for the work that you put into. Again, when a couple of months ago, Meta announced that they were allowing creators to share and sell their products on their platform, and then take only 50% of the revenue, and they think that that's a very reasonable amount to take from the creator. I think that's just mind blowing. To take something from some half of that money, I think that just doesn't make sense to me. So, and I think the challenge here is that we currently live in a situation, in an economy where value extraction is commonly accepted, where these large platforms, they extract the value from us and they make the most money out of this. While we should move to a system of value creation, where if you create content, if you put an effort to something, you are being rewarded for that content. And to do that, to achieve that, we need to change our thinking. We need to have this gestalt shift, this different perspective of how we look at what the internet is, and how we look at what it means to create a particular asset. And that's where I think NFTs are so important, because they allow us to do that. And they allow us to have that different perspective and start to monetize whatever we create in ways that we want. Now, of course, in everything that we do, also in a decentralized open metaverse, it's still hard work. It's difficult to create your own following. It's difficult to build a community. It's difficult to market yourself, to create a brand. That's difficult today, and that will be difficult tomorrow. And it requires hard work, persistency, a focus, discipline, flexibility to change whenever the world changes again. But that will always be hard. But I think it's still the advantage is that in hopefully tomorrow's version of the internet, which is hopefully an open version, at least those efforts are fully rewarded to you. And instead of handing over 50 or 60 or 70% of the money that you make, you only hand over 10 or 15%. And there's nothing wrong with handing money over to a platform that helps you reach a larger audience. To me, there's nothing wrong with that, but it should be within norms. And I think that's sort of the difference that we're talking about. So I think in order to achieve all that, again, that requires a different perspective. It requires that we, as shareholders of big companies, also say to each other, okay, we don't need a 20x return. We don't, I've been reading a lot of noise, a lot of news about unicorns versus zebras, where unicorns are like 10, 20x return, and zebras are like 2x return, but a lot more return for society in general. And I think that's a very, very good direction to go, where there's no need to have, I don't know, 100 billion on your bank account. 100 million is more than enough. I think from a shareholder model to a stakeholder model, I think this open metaverse can contribute to that. And then we can have this imagination age. And then if we have the tools to be able to easily create content, but remain in control over your content, I think that's where we want to go to. But that's hard. It's difficult to achieve that.
Definitely, and it's going to be increasingly more difficult. But at the same time, the wonderful things here is the tools are becoming faster as well. To let's say, if you look at the beginning of the internet, like you said before, and I like the parallel you did, it was much more difficult to get things. Now it's much faster. So the UI UX velocity goes faster than it would take years. Now it takes probably months, sometimes weeks. So of course, we can go here for 2 hours. I think this will be the first one of the interviews. We passed already 1 hour. So I have a couple more questions related with the book, and I think with the topics that you mentioned. So we touched the creative economy. So let's talk about the enterprise part of this. And you touch a couple of areas, like, for instance, creating a search for the metaverse, creating as well an interoperability between all the different metaverses. Because at the moment, what we have is mostly a couple platforms that have some kind of metaverse features, but not really an universe that you can say metaverse. So first of all, how this can actually work, because for instance, I'm actually working on technology metaverse, and for instance, you can use it for real estate, you can use it for fashion, and you can use it for a lot of different things. So I would like to see, especially, and you as well being an advisor to a lot of companies, and as well probably from the 100 companies you did, what would be the most interesting case studies? Because I think it's always easy to look at case studies when it comes to enterprise usage of the metaverse.
For me, I think the most important use case for the enterprise metaverse is digital twins, by far. In fact, I actually think that digital twins are sort of tier 1 of the metaverse. Tier 0 being the physical reality. And then if digital twins are tier 1, then the standards and protocols are tier 2. So we need the standards and protocols in order to have this interoperability. And then tier 3 are all the applications, all the lenses that we can build on top of that. And from an enterprise perspective, if we look at the future of work or the metaverse, the future of work is, what I count as the future of work is, data decentralization and automation, or in other words, data, blockchain, and AI, is really changing what we do. It's changing the type of work that we do. While the metaverse, among others, using digital twins, but also using VR and AR, is changing how we do that. And I think that's a big and important differentiator. So if we have digital twins, and this digital twin is basically a digital replica of a physical asset. And this physical asset can be something from a car. It can be a system of systems. So it can be a plane where we have different systems that are all interconnect, and we all have a digital replica of themselves. It can be an entire factory, it can be a supply chain. As long as it's a digital replica of a physical system, and we can then interact with that system in a virtual way. And this can either be interaction using virtual reality, so that we put on a virtual reality headset, and we can change the robot, or we can control the car, and any changes that we do in the virtual world are reflected in the physical world. Or we can use augmented reality, that let's say we need to fix a certain machine. We put on the AR glasses, and the AR glass tells us exactly, which bolt to screw, which wire to cut, and how to fix or repair that particular machine without really needing the training to do so. So I think digital twins enable that. And there are a lot of examples of companies who use digital twins already in order to collaborate across borders. And one example of a company that I think is doing really, really well in this is the car manufacturing company Volvo. So they use digital twins to create the car, to design the car without even using clay models, but to design the car in a virtual environment with the designers who are dispersed around the world. And they can create the car. Now, if they have created the car, and they have actually built the car, they then go onto the road with the car, but they use a mixed reality device to change the car while they're driving on the physical road. So they have a digital dashboard in front of them with a physical, while driving the physical car, and they can change the dashboard while driving to optimize it for the best conditions. I think those are fantastic examples of using digital twins in your systems, in your processes within your organization. And of course, the more advanced you go here, and the further you embrace digital twins and embed them in your organization, the more possibilities you can get, and the faster you can change your organization. So I think digital twins are by far the most important use case for the enterprise metaverse.
I think this is great examples. Thank you so much. And I think I like that you put it very practical. And for people listening to us, please research. There's a lot of case studies, a lot of things. What is important is working on that. So let's look at the elephant in the room, I would say, or more than multiple elephants in the room. So look at your chapter 8 that is about the dangers of the metaverse. And you have, for instance, the privacy as an illusion, abuse, harassment, and illegal content, imposter avatars, inequality, bad bots controlling the web. So there's a lot of things here that I think are really key. Of course, one point here, we can actually use a blockchain certification to avoid some of these things, but of course depends a lot of the concept of an open or closed metaverse and how we're going to do that. So I will pass the word to you. I think this is quite an important point, and for people listening to us, please, we need to be conscious about this, because it's in the end of the day, it's like people that still illusion about data privacy or data ownership. There's no data ownership unless you are in a global internet connect web, for good and for bad. So I would like to touch this from your holistic perspective.
You're absolutely right, Dinis. And I think that there are definite dangers lurking in the metaverse, and I'm a big fan of the metaverse, but we should be realistic, and we should be realistic that the technology is neutral in the end. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad, and where people use it for good, there are always people who use it for bad. And the same thing is happening in the metaverse. And I think the examples that you mentioned and I describe in the book sort of show how big a challenge we have here. Because if you think that we as consumers create a lot of data today, that's nothing that we will create 1, 2, 3, 5, or 10 years from now. Just to give you an example, if you have a virtual reality headset, that headset not only tracks what you're doing in the virtual world, but most of them have cameras on the front and they track your room. They track what's in your room. They track how big your room is. They track who is in your room. They also have, if they have sensors for your hands, they track if you have potentially a tremor in your hand that could indicate a disease that you don't know. If you have eye tracking in your device, it tracks where you're looking at, how long you're looking at it, whether your eyes are watery or not, or whether your eyes are diluted or not. All data points that reveal so much about you, about what you think is important, or what your preferences about, and some of these preferences that we might not even consciously be aware of. So we have to be really careful about this. And at the same time, we already see that a lot of abuse, a lot of harassment is happening. And the challenge with virtual reality in this case is that if the virtual reality is done in such a way where the latency is good and the graphics are at a certain standard, then our brains cannot make the difference between physical and digital. So a person who is harassed or sexually groped in the metaverse, to that person, that sound, that feels like a physical experience. It's terrible. So we need to prevent that. I think one of the biggest problems in the biggest elephants in the room is the problem of imposter avatars. Because in the metaverse, avatars will be the username of the future. It will be, you will use it for everything and everywhere, in every game and environment and everything. I mentioned earlier in our conversation at the start that I have a digital avatar, and I used that when the pandemic hit, that to use that for keynotes. Now I'm currently working on a MetaHuman. One of the technologies that have become really easy relatively to use is MetaHuman, where you can create a hyper-realistic copy of yourself. And I'm currently working on what I think is really pretty cool, sort of a voice, sort of a video chatbot, which is basically a digital twin of myself, where you can talk to me, where my AI answers a question like me with my voice, and it looks like me. I think that's cool. It's a great experiment. There are a lot of ethical dilemmas attached to that, and I like doing that to explore those. But it's not far away that these digital twins will become sort of commonplace in the world. Now, if I can create a digital twin of myself, you, Dinis, can create a digital twin of me as well, because there are plenty of pictures of me online. That you have my audio now, and there's plenty of audio of me online, so you can be me. And people are generally gullible, so if they think they see me, they hear me, then they think it is me. Now, for me, that would be annoying if that would happen, but it wouldn't be a global disaster. But if a CEO of a large company has a deep fake, or a world leader, we have a much bigger problem. And we already have seen these problems with terrible audio or with terrible sort of analog deepfakes. But when we have this hyper realistic reality, digital reality, where we can't distinct anywhere between what is real and what's not real, we are in for something scary. Now, there are ways around that. We can connect that avatar to an NFT. And if that NFT is then is soul bound, and it's so I can't trade it, and it's linked to my wallet, then if I can prove that, then it's me. But as we know by now, wallets can be hacked. So my computer can be hacked. So you can pretend to have access to that NFT and then still to be me. So we can create a workaround there that we link it to my biometrics. We can link it to my heart rhythm. We link it to my motion. We can link it to my iris. We can link it to whatever biometrics you can think of. But then what do we do with the data? Where is this data being stored? Is it being stored by a company like Meta? I wouldn't want that. So yeah, there are all kinds of challenges here that we need to solve, and we really need to think about these issues really, really hard, and now, and not like what we did with Web 2, that we, everyone enjoyed free social media, free email, all these free services, and before we knew it, we were the product. So, and I think the estimations are that by 2025, the cost of global data breaches will be $10 trillion per year. Just to think that in again a little bit, $10 trillion per year in data breaches because of all the data that's being created, all the lack of security and data privacy measures in place. This is a really big problem. We have to think very, very carefully about this, how we're going about this. In my book, I describe 3 possible streams of how to solve this: verification, education, and regulation. Verification, I just mentioned, a bit of like using verifying that we are dealing with the right person, verifying that the system works correctly. Education, that we educate the people, that we help people understand, become metaverse natives. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter. I want her to be aware of how to deal with this technology when she grows older. Who is going to teach her that? Is it going to be the primary school? Probably not, because they are education is still in a very old old paradigm. Is it going to be the parents? Often not, because the parents also don't have an idea. Is it going to be the government? Definitely not, because the government almost never has a clue here. So it's that education is crucial, but also very difficult. And then the final part is regulation. And the problem with regulation, as I just mentioned, regulation is often late. It's often outdated by the time it's implemented, and it's often takes the wrong approach. But regulation is necessary if we want to outlaw some of the problems that we already see happening with crypto, with NFTs. Regulation is very, very much necessary. So. It's not a happy story, but I wanted to include it in the book because I think it's important to tell the whole story of what the metaverse will bring us. There are definitely dangers that we need to find solutions for.
I think you put it fantastically. I completely am with you, and I think, like you said, technology is neutral. Is one of the things you have here. Is what we do with it. So I want to thank you, Mark. I think there's a lot of things I want to do a take 2 today. There's a lot of things to digest for people listening to us. And I really want to do a take 2, probably more in terms of the idea of the problems and the solutions, and probably a live with different people. So I think, just to repeat to people, I really suggest for you to buy the book, or at least engage as much as possible. Mark is very generous with his content. He's on Twitter and social media, LinkedIn. Step into the metaverse. Everyone should step into the metaverse. If you don't step, you will be as well. Someone will step you in. But we can actually make these to unlock $1 trillion economy, but as well to make it open, or at least more empowering for all of us. Mark, it's been an honor to have you here, and very inspiring and very practical as well. I like the approach of the book, that is very technical, but it goes always with a very clear solution and very detailed into the topics, into the different things, because there's a couple of books I'm reading, and this is definitely a fantastic book. So
Well, thank you.
Everyone will put all the links, Mark, to all the things. Thank you, Mark, and thank you for your time.